to another episode of My Soul Connection. I'm your host, Billy K. Kavert. Okay, I just wrapped up an amazing conversation with Dion Jensen, who's the author of Conscious Footsteps, deeply personal memoir about identity collapse, ego death, love, fear, and what it means to be reunited with yourself. From the outside, Dion had the picture-perfect life, the kind that many people are striving for these days. He had 2 decades of senior leadership under his belt, including serving as regional CEO in multinational organizations. He had prestige, success, a family, just a picture-perfect life. But when his career fell apart and the suppressed truths about his sexuality surfaced, the identity he had built couldn't hold anymore. What I appreciate about Dion so much and about his book is how grounded it feels. It's not preachy and it's not prescriptive. It's structured as a series of walks, not chapters, and each one feels like an invitation to pause, to look beneath your roles, beneath the performance of those roles, and ask yourself who you really are without them. In this conversation, we explore what it means to trade authenticity for approval, how easily worth gets tied up into productivity, and how fear often disguises as control. We also get into the delicate terrain of relationships, estrangement, leaving the door open in love when it wasn't left open for you, and the powerful reminder that we all remember our firsts, but we never know what our last is going to be, and how remembering that can change the way that we show up for people we love. If you're navigating identity shift, burnout, grief, or even just a sense that there's something more in life, I think this episode will resonate deeply with you. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dion as much as I enjoyed having it. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dion talking about his book, Conscious Footsteps. Dion, thank you so much for joining My Soul Connection. It's such a pleasure to have you here, and you're joining us all the way from Australia, so even more special for us out in the States.
Thank you, Kay. Thanks for having me. We're in the middle of summer here, so enjoying some really great weather.
Oh, well, don't talk to the people in the U.S. about that. We are not. I can't say that. I'm in California. It's pretty nice out here. I'm grateful that you were so generous in offering to share a copy of your book with me in advance so I could read through it. It was really compelling. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I read a lot of these kinds of books, and I thought this one was very thoughtful and thought-provoking and deep. But it wasn't pretentious, and it didn't have a prescription to it, a to-do list, which is what I really liked about it. So I resonated very deeply with it. And something that I noticed that we share in common is you mentioned that you wrote the book as a kind of a way to express yourself and unravel some of the things that you've been through over the years. And that's actually the very reason I decided to start this podcast. I sort of had a midlife awakening about 9 or 10 years ago and have learned so much in that time. And that's something that I've really wanted to come on here and share with people. It's partly a cathartic experience, but I wanted to share it as well. So tell me about your experience in deciding that you wanted to turn this into something public, especially since it was so deeply personal.
I think you hit the nail right on the head there when you said cathartic. So I've always been a person that journals or likes to ruminate on their thoughts in writing. I find it a really great process to be able to go through your feelings and begin to make sense of them. And for people, when they read the book, they'll know through the story itself that it was quite a lot of change and very turbulent change. And in some instances, very isolating change. So the ability to be able to individually sit down and make sense of what that change was really important. And I often say I'm a bit of an accidental author because I'd never intended on writing a book. And I think that's why it's not prescriptive and there's not a 10-step checklist in there or a plan that people need to follow, because it would have been disingenuous to write to myself that way. I'm a big walker and I process a lot of thoughts when I'm out in nature walking. And I actually constructed the book when I came to actually take it from journals and put it into a singular piece of writing. As opposed to chapters, they're classed as walks. And although there's continuity between the walks or chapters, however you want to view them, they're not necessarily meant to be read consecutively. You can move in between them if you choose. Some may resonate with readers, some may not. But it was a really cathartic experience for me. So each walk represents a bit of an awakening or a bit of alignment or some processing in the journey that I was on. and am on, I should say too.
Yeah, it's never ending, as you've mentioned in the book, and I totally
Exactly.
agree with that. There's no end point.
Yeah,
Keep working.
exactly.
I definitely relate with that because I do a lot of nature walks. I walk with my dog. I walk by myself. I'll go hiking, and that's where a lot of my ideas and inspiration and creativity come from. But it's also where I'm
Mm,
processing things that are going on throughout my life. And often I'll take my phone out and record a few voice notes to capture it all. I don't intend to be a writer or write a book myself. I do write some blogs and things like that, but you never know. That's the best way to stumble upon it.
thank you.
I want to
Thank
get
you.
into your story just a bit too, because it is definitely a compelling story as you're reading through it. I hate to spoil this for you, but it's hard to just put it down and read it in sections. I know that you kind of laid it out that way. I think it's one of those books that once people read it, they'll probably go back and review certain walks or chapters that
Mm,
really resonate with them and that they want to sit with some more. You talked in the very first walk about the death of your ego being having this big corporate life where you had some very big titles. You were a CEO of a multinational company. You were married with kids and had this jet-setting life where had these amazing travels. But you mentioned that you really were trading in your authenticity for some of with some of that identity that you were hanging on to. Tell us a little bit more about that. What do you feel like you were giving up at that time?
um, yeah, I feel like I was giving up the entirety of who I am in the authentic space. So I
Mhm.
think whenever we go into roles, more often than not, and I refer a lot to kind of the Australian pathway when I'm speaking about this, but I think that there is the ability for it to be generally applied to most countries. Uh, we take our kids, we put them through school. When they're at school, they're in their formative teenage years. They're then asked to choose a career about something that they're passionate about, that they never have really enough life experience to truly identify whether that resonates with them and should resonate with them for the next 50 or 60 years that they go into their working life. They either leave school and then go into the workforce, or they go to university or to college and then study to be in those roles. And it's very difficult to get off that treadmill. And once they are graduated, they are moving into the workforce and they're kind of stuck there. They then begin to measure their life based on what role they've got, how quickly they're climbing the corporate ladder, what their title is, what their frequent flyer status is, how quickly they can move through an airport, all of those real trivial things when you look at it upon reflection, perhaps when you're retired or when you leave the workforce, as to why they became so important to you. But for me, and my personal experience was, they tended to be a mask. And because I was good at what I did, I was able to shield the bits of me that I wasn't either comfortable sharing yet, or I hadn't even come to realize yet about who I was. And because you you get into that habit of constantly showing people a veneer or a constructed version of who you are, that the true you, when you make relationships, tends to just drop away. And people attach a relationship to you based on the mask that you've shown them, not who you truly are. One of the main chapters in the book, particularly at the start, that is probably closest to my heart is I'm not who I am. I am who I am, not what I do.
Right.
And I find that particularly it resonates with me, particularly because I spent so long living through my ego, not through who I am as an individual. And I think I see that in a lot of people, whether it be potentially men in the workforce, women in the home, men in the home, women in the workforce. Genders are not relevant, but what it does is it shows that we become the role we unbecome who we truly are for the role.
That's so true, and I can relate to everything that you said just now too. I've been in corporate America for 25 years and definitely have fallen into that trap of trying to kind of gain validation along the way as you climb that corporate ladder, and then you get rewarded for it
Mm,
too. So you're constantly, you get a bigger title, you get more money, your expense account, your travels grow, or whatever it is that you love about the job, or that your ego loves about the job, and you lose sight of
exactly.
yourself along the way. Yeah, I can completely see that. Your question, I've thought about that before in many social circles, how people are so quick to ask, "What do you do for a living?" And I've been on quite a few retreats over the last 10 years as I've been working through all this stuff as well. They tend to be more female dominated, but there's been men too. And I made it a real specific point of not asking people what they do for a living on these retreats because I wanted to get to know them wholly as they are and just figure out what their authentic nature was like and not have these, immediately when you hear what somebody does for a living, you make assumptions about them and you have expectations and you
Exactly.
assume they have a certain amount of status or income and it
Exactly
takes away
right.
from everything else. Yeah.
But more
Great
so,
point.
even when you're asked the question, it's really difficult to answer because we spend so long entrenched in that ego state of I am what I do, that when somebody says, well, who are you? Or they don't ask that question, the ability to answer it is increasingly difficult. And I think the reason why it becomes increasingly difficult is because if we are growing, that answer should always change.
Hmm.
And it shouldn't be something that's fixed or finite because who I am today may not necessarily be who I was yesterday. There may be components that I'll take into tomorrow, but my experiences will shape who that person is. And then it becomes really difficult then to articulate who you are and therefore really difficult to make an authentic or a genuine connection with somebody.
Well, and to your point, I think it's the part of it is also making that connection with yourself and figuring that stuff out for yourself, right? If you
Mm.
can't even answer that question for other people, then it looks like you have a little bit of introspection to do, right? I've thought about this over the years. How would I answer that question? And my first go-to after leaving the career stuff behind is I'm a mother of two, I'm a wife, I live in, El Dorado Hills, all these things. And it's like, none of that really matters. So out of curiosity,
Yeah.
how would you answer that question now about yourself?
What I really like to say now is I'm a work in progress. And it's funny, the next bit that I'll say to you can be a little bit confronting to some people based on how we view the word already. But I would like to say I'm a lover. And the
Hmm.
reason I say I'm a lover is because I believe I'm both a sponge and a mirror. So further on in the book, I do talk about my view of the purpose of life is to love, but we
Hmm.
get caught up in this rhetoric around what love is at a very surface level, and it tends to be related to sex or it tends to be related to obligation. Whereas for me, love, and the reason I say that I'm a lover is because it's the most natural and the true only natural emotion. Everything else we learn. And my belief is we go through life to learn just as much of who we are, but also as much as who we're not. And through the experiences that we have, we either get to understand who we aren't or who we are. And why I say sponge and mirror is because once I identify with something about who I am, I like to take that on. If I identify with something that I'm not, hopefully I can be a mirror back to that to show that there is a different way, or not that my way is necessarily the right way, but there could be an alternative where love at its truest sense is the answer.
Yeah, I love in that section of the book, you definitely changed my or just shifted my perspective a bit on love. You talked about the fact it's not transactional. It is a one-way street, which at first was the title of that walk was almost a little shocking. I'm like, one way? No way. Love is two-way. But as I thought about it and read through it, I thought, he's actually spot on. That's very true. And I think the way that I related it back to my own life, it's like my kids. There are times when my kids say some pretty awful things to me. They're teenagers, so
Yeah.
or they're at that point, like you mentioned in the book too, about you kind of forget how to show love, and they're at that stage sometimes where they just it's just an awkward place for them to be to show love outwardly. And I have two boys as well, so the fact that my love never changes for them shows that it is a one-way street and it's not transactional. And
Mm.
I also see that in the way that we learn to love ourselves. The concept of self-love has come up so much over the last few years, but I think a lot of people have a really hard time dissecting what that really means. And I think you break it down nicely in this book because self-love really it is about getting to know yourself and accept yourself for who you are fully and not being apologetic for it. I learned that I was even treating myself almost as a machine, and
Mm.
um I was stuck in that productivity trap that you've talked about a little bit throughout the book, especially kind of growing up in corporate America where producing is everything and you question whether you're worth something if you're not producing. So um learning to dial that back to me is and kind of cut myself some slack occasionally and realize that I am a human being. I'm not a machine. That's part of the process of learning to love myself as well.
Exactly
Ha-
right. And realizing that we are all imperfectly perfect.
Right.
There's not an aspect of us that is wrong or incorrect or should it be. It's about, like you said, gathering all the different parts of who we are and learning to appreciate and love and see them for what they are and not needing to hide them. Because I'm a firm believer in, unless you've got that level of comfort and acceptance and authenticity and come from a place that is genuine yourself, it's very difficult to espouse love outwardly
For
in its
sure.
truest sense. Yeah.
And how did that play out for you? You talk about a very vulnerable moment in the book a little bit earlier on. In fact, I think it was during the first walk or chapter when you talked about how you were sort of having some playful banter with your wife, and then it sounds like it almost came out accidentally about the way you felt about your sexuality. Like you were even surprised that you said it yourself. So how did that affect not only the way you saw yourself and loved yourself, and how did you grow out of that, but what about for your wife as well, who you've said you now have a really strong relationship with?
Yes, so to not be obscure in what happens within the book, but I do come out in the book, and I move from a heteronormative life into living as a gay man. And the process of doing that, you're exactly right. It was almost accidental, and I had a really beautiful connection with my wife, and I loved her and still love her. My ex-wife, I should say, love her very
Mhm.
dearly. Um, but there were still aspects of me that I was hiding. So as much as I gave her the most authentic version of myself that I could throughout our marriage, there was always a piece that wasn't 100% authentic because I hadn't shared that with her. And then once I had shared that with her, firstly, it felt like a weight had come off my shoulders. But it also, what I thought was a small, I mean, sexuality is a large thing for human beings, but it was
Mhm.
only one aspect of who I was as a person. Well, perhaps that's how I justified it to myself when I
Mhm.
was in the marriage. Once I had become more authentic and owned that piece of me, it had a huge ripple effect throughout the entirety of who I am as a person. Loving actually became a hell of a lot easier. Those masks that I was wearing around needing to perform in a certain way or to appear a certain way all became redundant, and they didn't have to exist anymore. So I think there's a lot of power in realizing components of yourself that you may perceive as small, because they could actually be the keys to unlocking parts of yourself that are infinitely larger as well.
Right, so it's kind of like delayering. It somehow creates this unearthing process of other things that are to follow, then it becomes a much larger aspect of your life.
Exactly right. Exactly.
And one thing, there was a theme that came up over and over again throughout the book, and that was about fear and about control.
Mhm.
And the control
Mhm.
piece really resonated with me because I'm a known control freak, and I'm really
Yeah.
working on that. I've gotten but much better over the years. I'm really trying to let things go. But I like that you said control is just fear wearing a tie. That when you're trying
Mm.
to control things, essentially that you're basically gripping on tightly to the outcome of something, but it's just all fear based. And I personally found, I don't know if you experience this too, but the older I got and the more wealth I accumulated and things I accumulated and this, like you said, the appearance of this perfect life or whatever, the more it actually created fear in me because there was a fear of losing it all. And
Losing.
it's
Yeah.
almost easier to start out fresh out of college when you're broke and you have nothing, you have no assets. But the fear of losing that stuff is real. So what would you say to people, because I'm sure you still have a lot of friends and former colleagues from the corporate world who
Mm.
have those kind of innate fears. How would you guide them through that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And the fear kind of, I would never be so crass as to assume your age, but for me at 45 now, you're getting closer to retirement, so that fear kicks in around, well, I can't start again, or it's difficult to lose again. I need to make sure that I've got, sufficient means to be able to survive beyond retirement, etc. But fear. Firstly, I experienced a lot of anxiety and at times a lot of depression, quite deep depression as well. And I deliberately pushed myself to try and understand what the underlying emotions for anxiety and depression are. And again, I would never be one that tries to tell others why they have anxiety or why they have depression. But for me, what I really took away and was able to uncover is a really succinct definition of it. So that anxiety and the depression and that fear was me looking at the past, taking any experience or memory of the past and applying it to the future, neither of which timelines currently exist. And all it was doing is affecting my present state.
Mm.
So that's what fear was doing. And it was locking me. And I use the analogy of concrete boots. And I used to use the analogy of concrete boots in my corporate life when people were fearful of taking the next step. They were fearful of doing something bold. We become stuck. And what these concrete boots do is they lock us in place. We can't turn left. We can't turn right. We can't go backwards. We can't go forwards. All we do is we are stuck where we currently are. And we live in that fear. And we don't end up going anywhere. So for me, that process is about saying, yes, I can start again if I need to. I will be okay. Having that underlying belief that things have generally always worked out and they will continue to always work out. Yes, there may be bumps in the road. However, I can have belief and faith in myself that it will be okay. One of the last chapters, though, and I always try and anchor it back into reality because we do live in a world that has certain requirements and expectations for us to be able to exist within it. And it's about growing spiritually in a material world where it is okay to live in both. You can awaken, you can grow while you also still want things. You might want a new car. You might want a new kitchen. You might want a lovely holiday. That doesn't mean that you are less spiritual for wanting those things or you're growing less for wanting those things or desiring those things. But what's important is we're not clinging to those things as items that validate who we are and validate our success and validate how long we've or how hard we've toiled or how hard we've worked. They are simply things we can experience, but it's also about acknowledging that it's okay if we don't have those as well.
Yes, definitely very true. And interestingly, the kind of theme behind this podcast is spirituality meets everyday life, because I came
Mm.
from a kind of a world of very black and white thinking, and I really lacked in spirituality. And now people probably think I sing Kumbaya every day in my office because I gravitated toward that so much. But I found I've struck a balance. And I'm curious, how do you feel just coming out of the corporate environment for so long? Is it possible to be in that environment and still live really spiritually and authentically, or do you feel that sets people up for failure in that regard?
Uh, yes, I do. I don't think the answer is we burn everything down and start again
Right.
because it's not going to happen, put it that way.
Mhm.
So what I think is important is we preference authenticity. And it's funny, if you listen to many a business podcast or a leadership podcast, it's all about leading with authenticity and being yourself, but perhaps grounding those concepts a little differently. So realizing that if you did lead with love, and again, not that surface level love, but a true lead with love where you are making decisions for the benefit of the person that you're leading or the team that you're leading, or where you want the business's focus to be, perhaps the purpose of the business. You can introduce and you can integrate the concepts of both. But what I think the biggest gain for individuals will be is they are turning up and they're no longer wearing a mask. So work becomes easier because you're not being someone that's just applying a persona. You're getting to be and you're feeling comfortable in who you are authentically. And therefore, you're not so much working at it, you're working within it. So I think the two
Yeah.
can coexist very easily.
Excellent point. And I think as a woman in corporate, especially when I started out as a young woman, I think the idea was that, and I know a lot of women can attest to this, that we had to conform to the man's way, the man's
Yeah.
world. And even in, thinking of moving into leadership roles, the style of leadership was questioned when women would come in. I mean, and this was a little while ago, not super recent, but it would be questioned when the women would come in and sort of lead by the nature of the way they're used to almost leading their household. But so they
Hmm.
were strong, they were confident, they were competent, but they maybe used more of their innate nurturing as a way of leading
Exactly
and
right.
coaching as opposed to the heavy hand all the time, and it was a really
Exactly.
uncomfortable transition to watch a lot of my female colleagues and myself even have to break out. That's an area where I looked at and said, "Wow, I am certainly not being authentic because I'm just trying to validate myself to all these men." And I got into an industry at a young age who was which was very male dominated, and so I was not only a female but a young female, and I was just trying to live up to that expectation all the time. So I think you're right. I think it takes some real introspection and awareness and some courage too, right? I mean, all the things that you've done are extremely courageous, and we've seen it become effective for people. I know a lot of female leaders who are doing quite well and have the respect of their teams. So,
I completely agree with you. We've gone to a place where we've told women be less of who you are innately, and we've gone to a place where men have to quash that innateness within them in order
mm,
to be seen as acceptable. Which, I
right.
mean, but when you say it out loud like that, it just seems
It
so.
sounds silly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. Exactly.
And to your point earlier, it's not always necessarily defined by gender either. I mean, there are
No,
some men who are innately softer and more nurturing, and some women who are the opposite. And it's okay to be whatever it is you are
exactly,
as long as it's true to yourself. So, and
exactly
of
right.
course, then you're respecting other people around you. So, I love the fact that you talk about the stories that people tell themselves, the stories that they grew up
Mm.
hearing and that sort of replay in their minds over and over, and that they just live by it. They hear stories in their childhood and it becomes this belief. And I wanted to know how people can begin to break those things down. Like in your case, it sounds like you started questioning some of the stories you were told about your father, but do we question everything, or is it just, are there certain things that you think will stand out for people naturally?
Yeah, I think it could be unproductive to begin to question everything. But I feel that people will begin to experience is um, as they slide more and more and feel more and more comfortable in their authentic selves, or be stories that lack resonance with them anymore. That will come through a confronting thought. It could be a situation where you go, hey, that's also very similar to a story I've been told. It could simply be something in society that you might see. It could be a news program that begins to challenge you. It could be you're at a church service. It could be you're at a school. It could be anywhere. But I
Hmm.
think that lack of resonance is something that you begin to feel. And when you begin to feel that, rather than pushing it away and go, well, no, this is a foundational belief I've always had. So I'm going to continue holding that as a foundational belief or hold it as true. That should be more of a trigger point to go, is there something here? And there may not be. But I think it's an opportunity or an invitation when you lack that resonance anymore to go, is there something here as a layer I can pull back and begin to challenge that story and then potentially grow through that process as well?
I wish more people in the world today would think about those things, especially given our worldwide political climates. Trust me, I'm
Mm.
not here to talk about politics, but for myself personally, that was something I had to unravel on my own. Was sort of the political beliefs that I was brought up with, and things just started to not feel right and didn't resonate with me, as you said. That's a really good way of putting it.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Politics is a real classic example of where generally um, a child will follow the beliefs of the parent because that's just always been that way, particularly if you've grown up in a household where you would comfortably talk about politics, or you're in a country, I hope, where there are free elections. And politics is a classic example of when you potentially peel back a layer or you hear a politician speak that you go, that just doesn't sit well with me.
Hmm.
And then you can begin to challenge that. So I think that's a really good real world example, but those examples will exist everywhere.
Right.
Mm.
And going back to the kind of what you had discovered about the stories that you were told about your father, and then how that really
Mm.
unraveled. And I don't want to give away too much in the book because people need to read it for themselves. But um, you've had you've had some pretty intense experiences with your
Mm.
relationships with your father, with your own children. How do you make sense of the way that you've chosen to handle keeping an open door with your children who you talk about in the book as being estranged from now to no fault of your own, but because of stories they were told? How do you move on with the idea that your own father didn't choose that same path? How does that sit with you moving forward, and how do you come to terms with that?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to say with great difficulty. That's not something
Mm,
that just happened
right.
overnight. That was a good 4 or 5 year process of me processing the emotions and thoughts there. And I went through the whole gamut of emotions too. It wasn't so lovely as it is at the end all through. So I had anger, I had fear, I had resentment, I had all of the negative emotions that you could possibly consider. Some of the depression came from those experiences. But I am also a firm believer in that we can either look for a growth opportunity in every situation, or we can choose to be held prisoner by it. And in another aspect of the book, I use that prison analogy a lot because our minds are incredibly powerful. And when I talk about anxiety and depression, it got to the point where my anxiety and depression was so confronting that I thought, surely this just isn't worth it anymore. Um, but then if it's got that power, it's also got the opposite power as well. And I eventually got to the point where I could learn from those experiences and I could see the correlation between two distinct different life experiences, but also how they married together quite closely. And I got a really beautiful outcome from it with the realization that love is a one-way street and that you can have an open door policy when you begin to see that it's not someone rejecting you. We need to be more, I guess, outward in what that experience is. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's gosh, I feel for you for having to go through all of that. That was sounded like a long, hard road, but man, you did all the work. You felt everything and you made sure you didn't leave any
Lemons to
stone unturned.
lemonade, right?
Right, exactly. Oh man. But also even the thought of loving unconditionally and love being a one-way street, part of that too, I think, is just accepting that not everybody's going to handle everything the same way or as eloquently, and everyone
Mm,
has a different way of viewing the world and different life experiences. And so I try to remind myself often of people that I run into out in the world, whether they're clients, their loved ones, or family or friends, that everybody is doing the best they can with what they have. And if they make a decision that they don't want to continue a relationship with someone, for example, there's usually a reason for that. It's not it's really actually not personal. It has something to do with themselves. And so if you love someone, and I think you're like me where you just love human beings in general, then you have to give people that grace. And some of that is art of forgiveness too, right?
exactly right. And think of it
Mhm.
from love is something you send out. It doesn't matter if it's not reflected back at you. Because
Right.
if everyone sent love out, inevitably it would be reflected back. But in every instance, we can't guarantee that reflection. And it's about finding comfort in who you are, that it's okay for it to just go out.
Right. One of the other things that I really love that you talked about is how some of the greatest healing comes from not learning something new about yourself necessarily, but really unlearning. And I mean, that kind of goes back to
Yeah.
the stories, but it could just be about unlearning a certain pattern or behavior that you've built. And the process of unlearning is difficult. It takes time and it takes repetition. So I like that you point out in the book several times that it's not something that's going to happen instantaneously. It's something we have to work at and that we have to be really conscious of along the way. Were there any really good resources that you had along the way that you can credit to helping you sort of unravel this? Like, did you use therapy, coaches, or just have a really good, it sounds like you had a really good friends and family network to support you, but was there anything else that you can point to help you unlearn?
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. I had a really great friends and family network. What I had to learn to do was rely on them more.
Hmm.
I think a lot of professionals, they can also become quite self-reliant because it usually is them against the world, so to speak, or they perceive that it's them against the world. And part of that unlearning is realizing that we all have networks, but it's about making that conscious choice to use them. And that was the big part of unlearning for me, was the learning to use what's around me and that there are resources. Therapy is a wonderful resource. Although I didn't use it personally, it is a wonderful resource for many people. And there is so much literature, so many podcasts, so many media types out there where you can find things that resonate or to help you along that unlearning journey. But definitely for me, it was a family and friends network and learning to use them and learning or unlearning to not be vulnerable and to lean in to being vulnerable and opening up and speaking honestly about how you're thinking or how you're feeling. Because once you've kind of cracked that first instance of vulnerability, then it becomes a hell of a lot easier to continue that conversation and get to that place where where you're feeling a bit lighter.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think a lot of people have the resources, but the asking for the help, that taking that initial step is very uncomfortable for them. But once you crack it open, usually the floodgates open a bit, but it is hard to make that first step, especially if you've been a really self-sufficient, self-reliant person
Mm.
all of your life. Asking for help is very difficult. But
And it kind of
um,
cycles a bit back, not in a negative sense, but it cycles a bit back to the ego, and
yeah,
that we don't want to be seen as weak, or we don't want to be seen asking for help, but realizing that the ego is not the important part. It's kind of the heart that needs the comfort and needs the learning.
absolutely.
Mm.
And one of the other big themes that, again, it was kind of weaved in and out throughout the book has to do with just being present. And we hear about that all the time. I mean, we know that it's important to be present, but then we get caught up in whatever we're doing throughout the day. We go on autopilot and we forget to take a walk outside, smell the fresh air, watch the sunset. There was a quote you had at the end of the book that I didn't write down, but I just loved it, about not just seeing it, but really kind of watching it unfold. And it kind of goes back to that point you made about that we have a first for everything. We all remember
Mm.
our first kiss, our first date, our first job, our first love, whatever it is, but we never know when it's going to be our last. And
Yeah.
that was a really impactful point in the book. And I think when you don't really know what your last is going to be, it really helps you to kind of stay present. Is that something
Yeah.
that you've just weaved into your everyday life?
Yeah. So some of it comes back to that definition of fear around where our mind wants us to constantly live in a place other than here.
Mhm.
And it wants to dream about the future. It wants to fear the future. It wants to reminisce about the past or romanticize the past. It never wants us to go, just take a pause and realize where I am. And generally, where you are at any point in time is a wonderful place. And so it's taking that learning around not allowing the mind to keep you so busy and away from the present that you forget to enjoy the experiences that you're having. And it doesn't need to be, I need to be on holiday, or I need to be buying something new, or I need to be doing this wonderful experience. It's the small things that I've started to appreciate more. It is enjoying your coffee rather than rushing through it and getting out the door. It's about having a conversation with your kids about how their school day was, and just being so present that you go, no, you haven't used enough words there for me. Tell me more. You've got to use at least 10
Right.
words about how your day was, rather
Love
than
it.
going, oh, okay, good. I'm glad that it was good. So it's just living in the present a lot more, and then not taking it for granted as well, because that whole premise around you never know your last, your first kiss, your first home, your first car, your first job, all of those things were really important at one stage, potentially was something that you strived for. Then all of a sudden we took it for granted and expected it to always be there. So the whole theme of that particular walk is realizing that there is so much wonderful experiences that we have right in front of us now. And it's just about being aware and present enough to realize them and enjoy them.
Yeah, and I love the connection you made also to being present in relationships, even if it's somebody who's just made a big impact in a small amount of time, and it's because of their presence and their authenticity, right? You really remember people who showed up as themselves and who were vulnerable with you, and who shared who they really were and who were present. Meanwhile, there's other people, I hear people talking about, their fathers or people in their family who they've known their whole life and they have no real connection with because they've just been closed off for so many years. So I think that was a really valid point as well, that we take that mask off and be really as authentic as we can in every given situation, even if it's fleeting. So
Exactly right. that the walk you're talking about, a minute, month, or a lifetime, we always tend to align the length of a relationship with the quality. But you're exactly right. And we also don't know the purpose of all interactions either. It could be that we're there to give that person something. It doesn't always need to be something we receive from that interaction. So turning up as your authentic self and having a genuine connection, albeit a fleeting one, you just don't know the impact it will have on others or the impact that it will retrospectively have on you.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know we need to wrap up soon. I'm curious, one future related question for you is talking about who am I and what do you do for a living? Those kinds of questions that you get. Would you
Yeah.
describe yourself as an author now? Is that, can you use that word? And I hope there's going to be a number 2 coming.
Um, I'm definitely getting more comfortable with the idea of saying I'm an author. And yes, it's not clearly defined what the next one is going to be, but there'll be a lot of the conscious living concepts that we brought into subsequent books, where I think there's a lot of value in really grounding in real terms and in real life, how to live more consciously through that. So when I feel I've got enough value to be able to put into a second book, it will certainly be there.
Awesome. I know those things don't come quickly, but you never know. You might get have a strike of inspiration all of a sudden and bust something out really fast.
True.
But I do love, though, just kind of in closing about what you talked about with certainty. You said something about that you've learned to trade certainty in for curiosity. And I think that's a great way of thinking of things. I learned something similar from a coach that I worked with several years ago about trading judgment in for curiosity. So it's like when you find yourself
Yeah.
judging someone, because we all still do it occasionally, turn that into curiosity. Like instead of projecting onto them some statement about who they are or making
Yes.
assumptions, ask yourself, I wonder where that's coming from, and be curious about it. And I think that's a really good way to approach life as well.
That belief of, I know I will get there. I cannot wait to see the route life takes me in order to reach that destination.
Well, again,
Yeah.
amazing book. I really, really loved it. I will personally be buying several copies. I know I have a few friends who will really enjoy reading it. It's one that can live on the shelf and you can refer back to, because there are a ton of quotes in there that I think I'm going to be using. I love really impactful quotes that make you stop and think, and there's some really great ones in there. So thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to see what you put out next, and we'll be following you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for the opportunity as well.
Absolutely. Take care and good luck. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of My Soul Connection. If you found the information useful, be sure to rate and review the episode and share it with others as well. And make sure you subscribe to the My Soul Connection podcast so you'll never miss an update. Until next time, keep connecting with your soul.